Blood trickled down Julian Carter's face as the officer slammed him against the police car. The crowd gathered phones, recording. Nobody knew this wrongful arrest would expose decades of corruption in the Westlake Police Department and bring the entire system crashing down. Not even Commissioner Harrison Julian's father. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments below, hit that like button and subscribe to follow Julian's journey from victim to catalyst for change in a system that was designed to fail him. Ready to discover how a single traffic stop uncovered a web of corruption that went all the way to City Hall. Julian Carter carefully checked his rearview mirror as he navigated his black BMW through the tree-lined streets of Westlake's affluent Maple Ridge neighborhood. At 25, the architectural engineer had already made a name for himself with innovative, sustainable designs, but tonight all he wanted was to get home after a grueling client meeting that had run late into the evening. The roads were mostly empty at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, making the sudden flash of police lights behind him all the more startling. Julian frowned, mentally reviewing his driving. He'd been going exactly the speed limit, had used his turn signals properly, and his registration was current. Nevertheless, he pulled over promptly, remembering everything his father had taught him about police interactions. He rolled down his window, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and waited. Officer Richard Collins approached with a flashlight beam that swept across Julian's face, before settling directly in his eyes, momentarily blinding him. "License and registration to," Collins demanded without preamble or explanation for the stop. Julian spoke clearly. "My wallet is in my jacket pocket, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, officer." Collins didn't acknowledge Julian's careful narration, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Julian moved deliberately, hyper-aware of each motion as he retrieved his documents and handed them over. Collins studied Julian's license with visible skepticism. "This your car, Mr. Carter?" The question carried an unmistakable accusatory tone. "Yes, sir, it is. I purchased it last year," Julian replied evenly, though a familiar knot of tension began forming in his stomach. "And what are you doing in this neighborhood tonight?" Collins pressed, shining the flashlight around the luxury vehicle's interior. "I'm an architectural engineer. I was meeting with clients about their home renovation. The Wilsons at 823 Oakwood Drive," Julian explained, maintaining his composed demeanor despite the unnecessary questioning. Collins's expressions hardened. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Julian's heart rate quickened, but he complied. "May I ask why, officer? I don't believe I've committed any traffic violation." Collins didn't answer, instead ordering Julian to place his hands on the hood of the patrol car. "We've had reports of vehicle thefts in this area. Your car matches a description." Julian felt the familiar mixture of fear and indignation rising. "Officer, this is my car. My ID matches the registration. I work in this neighborhood regularly. If you'd like, you can call my clients to verify." Collins cut him off. "Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Julian shook his head. "No, sir, not at all. I just don't understand why—" Collins moved suddenly, grabbing Julian's arm and twisting it behind his back. "Stop resisting it!" the officer shouted, though Julian had offered no resistance. Instinctively, Julian reached for his phone with his free hand. "I need to call someone." Collins immediately knocked the phone away, shoving Julian roughly against the police cruiser. "He's reaching possible weapon." Collins called out to no one, as if narrating for a body camera or justifying his actions to potential witnesses. Julian's face pressed against the cold metal of the car hood. "Officer, please, my father is Police Commissioner Harrison. There's been a misunderstanding." Collins laughed dismissively. "Yeah, and my dad's the president. Stop lying and making things worse for yourself." The situation escalated rapidly as Collins handcuffed Julian, the metal cutting painfully into his wrists. A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, several people holding up phones to record the incident. Julian noticed a trickle of blood running down his face from where his head had hit the vehicle. "You're making a serious mistake," Julian said, his voice strained but still controlled. "Ask for Commissioner Harrison. Call it in." Collins yanked Julian upright, ignoring his words. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Collins continued reciting the Miranda rights, he pushed Julian into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, Julian could see bystanders shaking their heads, some arguing with each other about what they'd witnessed. One woman approached Collins, saying something Julian couldn't hear, but the officer waved her off dismissively. During the ride to the police station, Julian attempted several times to explain his relationship to the commissioner, but Collins either ignored him or responded with skeptical remarks tinged with racial undertones. "Sure, you're the commissioner's son driving around Maple Ridge at midnight. Next you'll tell me you live in one of those mansions too." At the station, Julian was processed like any other suspect, his requests to contact his father repeatedly denied. The booking officer smirked when Julian mentioned his relationship to Commissioner Harrison. "We get all kinds in here claiming connections," he commented to Collins. "Last week, some guy swore he was the mayor's golf buddy." Julian was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell with 2 other men. His head throbbed where it had connected with the police car, but his requests for medical attention were ignored. As midnight turned to early morning, Julian sat on the hard bench, his architectural plans for the Wilson family forgotten, replaced by the harsh reality of how quickly his life as a successful black professional had been reduced to yet another statistic of the system. Police Commissioner David Harrison was in the middle of a contentious budget meeting with city officials when his assistant Tanya slipped into the conference room with an urgent expression. She leaned down to whisper in his ear, "Sir, there's a situation involving your son. Julian's been arrested." Harrison's normally impassive face registered momentary confusion. "Arrested? There must be some mistake." He excused himself immediately, leaving behind puzzled administrators and a half-finished presentation on community policing initiatives. As he strode down the hallway toward the holding area, his mind raced through possibilities. There had to be an error. Julian was meticulous, law-abiding, cautious to a fault, because he knew the scrutiny that came with being both black and the commissioner's son. Harrison's pace quickened as he approached the booking desk. "Where is Julian Carter?" he demanded of the desk sergeant, who was engrossed in paperwork. The sergeant looked up, recognition dawning slowly. "Commissioner, I didn't realize you were stopping by tonight." Harrison didn't bother with pleasantries. "My son was brought in, Julian Carter. I want to see him immediately." The sergeant's face transformed as comprehension hit him. "Carter is your son, but he's—" The man caught himself before finishing the thought, but Harrison knew exactly what had gone unsaid. "But he's black." Harrison had adopted Julian when he married Julian's mother Andrea when Julian was 8 years old, but he had always considered Julian his son in every way that mattered. "Where is he?" Harrison repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. The sergeant scrambled to check the computer. "He was brought in by Officer Collins about an hour ago, suspected vehicle theft and resisting arrest." Harrison's expression darkened. "Get Officer Collins in here, now, and take me to my son." The holding area fell silent as Harrison entered, his tailored suit and commanding presence immediately drawing attention. Julian stood up from the bench, a small trail of dried blood visible on his temple. The sight of his injured son caused something to shift fundamentally in Harrison's perception. For years, he had heard complaints about differential treatment from black community members, had reviewed statistics showing disparities, had implemented nominal reforms, but he had always believed his department was better than most, that incidents were isolated. Now, looking at Julian's face, decades of professional distance collapsed. The desk officer hurriedly unlocked the cell. "There's been a misunderstanding, Commissioner. We didn't realize—" Harrison cut him off. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You didn't realize who he was, so he wasn't treated with basic dignity or respect. Julian stepped out, maintaining his composure despite the ordeal. I tried to tell them, Dad, multiple times. Officer Collins wouldn't listen. Officer Collins chose that moment to arrive, his confident stride faltering when he saw Harrison standing with Julian. Commissioner, I wasn't informed you would be... Harrison interrupted. You weren't informed because you failed to follow proper procedure. My son identified himself correctly, and you ignored him. You escalated a situation, unnecessarily used excessive force, and made an arrest without probable cause. Collins shifted uncomfortably, but quickly adopted a defensive posture. Sir, with all due respect, I was responding to reports of vehicle thefts in the area. The suspect, your son, matched a description we received. When I approached, he became argumentative and reached for something in his vehicle. Julian shook his head in disbelief. That's absolutely false. I was reaching for my phone to call for help when you assaulted me. Everything I did was in full compliance with your instructions. Collins's face hardened. That's not how I remember it. Harrison noticed other officers gathering at the periphery, watching the confrontation with varying expressions of concern, curiosity, and in some cases, subtle solidarity with Collins. We'll review the body camera footage, Harrison stated firmly. Collins hesitated momentarily. There was a technical issue with my camera tonight. Harrison's expression became granite. Convenient. I assume the dashboard camera was also malfunctioning. Before Collins could respond, Julian interjected. It doesn't matter. There were at least 4 bystanders recording on their phones. I saw them. As if on cue, Harrison's phone buzzed with a notification. Tanya had sent him a link to a video already circulating on social media showing Julian's arrest from a bystander's perspective. The footage clearly contradicted Collins's version of events. Harrison looked back at Collins, whose face had drained of color. We'll discuss this further in the morning. For now, I'm taking my son home. Though Julian was officially released, he insisted on documentation of the entire incident. I want everything on record, he told his father as they completed the necessary paperwork. This can't just disappear because I happen to be your son. In the privacy of Harrison's office, as a department medic attended to Julian's injuries, father and son had a conversation that should have happened years earlier. This isn't the first time, Julian admitted quietly. What do you mean? Harrison asked, though part of him already knew. Being stopped for no reason, being questioned about whether I belong somewhere, having to justify my presence. It happens all the time, Dad. The only difference tonight is that Collins took it further than most. So Harrison sat heavily in his chair, the weight of this revelation pressing down on him. Why didn't you tell me? Julian's laugh was hollow. Would you have believed me, really believed me, or would you have assumed there was more to the story, that maybe I was speeding a little or looked suspicious somehow? Harrison had no answer because Julian was right. He would have rationalized, minimized, explained away. He had done exactly that with countless civilian complaints over the years. The department I've built, Harrison began, but couldn't finish the thought. Julian filled in the silence. The department you've built reflects the system it exists within. You've tried to make it better, I know that. But tonight you saw firsthand what happens when a black man encounters the wrong officer, even a black man with every possible privilege and connection. As they spoke, Harrison's phone continued buzzing with notifications. The video was spreading rapidly, along with Julian's name and his relationship to the commissioner. By morning, it would be everywhere, forcing a reckoning that neither father nor son had anticipated, but that perhaps had been inevitable all along. By dawn, the video of Julian's arrest had amassed over 1 million views across platforms, the hashtag #Justice for Julian trending nationwide. Local news vans crowded the street outside police headquarters, reporters delivering breathless updates against the backdrop of a building that had suddenly become the epicenter of a national conversation. The son of Police Commissioner Harrison, brutalized by one of his own officers, announced a CNN correspondent. The incident raising questions about who policing truly serves and protects in America. Inside headquarters, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Officers clustered in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly when others walked by. Lines were being drawn, with some defending Collins as a good cop who made an understandable mistake, while others expressed disgust at what they'd seen in the video. Commissioner Harrison moved through the building like a ghost, aware of the whispers that followed him. In his office, his phone rang constantly. The mayor, city council members, the governor, civil rights organizations, all demanding immediate action. Mayor Patricia Wilson didn't bother with niceties when Harrison finally took her call. "This is a disaster, David. The city cannot afford riots or lawsuits right now. You need to get this under control immediately." Harrison's grip tightened on the receiver. "With all due respect, Mayor, this isn't about optics or finances. My son was assaulted by an officer under my command." Wilson's voice sharpened. "And that's precisely why you need to handle this carefully. People will claim you're biased either way, too harsh because of personal vendetta or too lenient because it's your department. Find a middle path. Have Julian drop any charges. Issue a joint statement about miscommunication. Suspend Collins with pay for a few weeks and implement some additional training. This needs to disappear from the news cycle." Before Harrison could respond, his assistant notified him that Collins's union representative, Michael Bronson, was demanding a meeting. Bronson, a former officer with 20 years on the force, didn't wait for an invitation to sit. "Commissioner, I understand this is a difficult situation, but Officer Collins has an exemplary record. He was responding to legitimate reports of vehicle thefts in that neighborhood." Harrison's expression remained neutral. "Are these reports documented? Was a description of a suspect or a vehicle officially distributed?" Bronson shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sure Collins can provide that information during the investigation, which I assume will be handled by an independent team, given your obvious conflict of interest." He leaned forward. "The union's position is clear. Collins followed protocol as he understood it. Any disciplinary action will be vigorously challenged. We protect our own, a principle I'm sure you appreciate, especially now." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Meanwhile, across town, Julian sat in his parents' living room watching the storm unfold on television while fielding calls from friends, colleagues, and increasingly journalists. His mother, Dr. Andrea Carter Harrison, a renowned neurosurgeon who had always maintained a careful distance from her husband's professional world, now sat beside her son with an expression that mingled fury and vindicating sadness. "For 15 years, I've told your father what it's like for you, for me, for anyone who looks like us," she said quietly. All those dinner conversations where he defended his officers, explained away the statistics, assured us his department was different. Julian took his mother's hand. He's seeing it now, maybe for the first time. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Reverend Marcus Johnson and attorney Zoe Washington, prominent community leaders who had fought for police accountability for decades. "Julian." Reverend Johnson embraced him carefully, mindful of his injuries. "Your suffering may be the catalyst this city has needed. Are you ready to speak your truth?" Outside the Harrison home, a small group of protesters had gathered with signs reading, "Justice for Julian," and "Who polices the police?" Their numbers would swell to thousands by nightfall. Back at headquarters, Harrison convened an emergency meeting with his command staff. Deputy Commissioner Thomas Reed Harrison, second in command and closest ally in the department, didn't mince words. "David, I know he's your son, but we need to handle this by the book. Any special treatment undermines everything we've built." Harrison looked around the table, suddenly seeing his trusted team through new eyes. By the book, do you mean the way we've handled dozens of similar complaints, because that approach has clearly failed? He slid a folder across the table. This contains 17 civilian complaints against Officer Collins in the past 3 years, all involving Black or Latino drivers. Every single case was dismissed without thorough investigation. Who signed off on these dismissals? The uncomfortable silence that followed told Harrison everything he needed to know. I'm assigning Captain Layla Jackson from Internal Affairs to conduct a full investigation, not just into last night's incident, but into our entire complaint review process. The announcement sent a visible ripple of alarm around the table. Jackson, a Black woman with a reputation for unyielding integrity, had repeatedly pushed for stronger oversight measures against significant resistance. Captain William Brooks, who oversaw Collins's precinct, spoke up. "Commissioner, with all due respect, an internal witch hunt will destroy morale. We should focus on the specific incident rather than turning this into a referendum on the entire department." Harrison's gaze hardened. If examining our practices constitutes a witch hunt, then perhaps there are more problems than I realized. Captain Jackson begins her investigation today. I expect full cooperation from everyone in this room. As the meeting dispersed, Deputy Commissioner Reed lingered. "David, you're putting me in an impossible position. The rank and file will see this as you choosing your family over the department." Harrison turned to his old friend. "Tom, for the first time I'm seeing clearly what this department truly is, not what I've pretended it to be. The question isn't whether I'm choosing my family over my officers. The question is why those have become opposing sides at all. Has there ever been a moment when you realized the system you believed in was fundamentally broken? Type number 1. In the comments if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling by those sworn to protect and serve. Hit the like button if you believe accountability should apply to everyone, regardless of their badge or position. Now let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered that the institution you've dedicated your life to building might be causing harm to the very people you love most? Let's continue Julian's story and find out how Commissioner Harrison navigates this impossible situation. The morning after Julian's arrest, Commissioner Harrison made a decision that sent shockwaves through the department. He appointed Captain Layla Jackson to lead an independent internal investigation with unprecedented scope and authority. Jackson, a 20-year veteran who had risen through the ranks despite constant resistance, was known for her uncompromising stance on accountability. "I want everything," Harrison told her in their private meeting. "Every complaint, every dismissal, every traffic stop record. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to me." Jackson nodded, her expression serious. "You understand what this might uncover, sir. Once this door is opened," Harrison looked out his office window at the growing crowd of protesters. "It should have been opened long ago." Jackson assembled a small team of officers she personally trusted, setting up an operation room separate from the main department facilities to minimize interference. Her first request access to all complaints filed against Officer Collins met immediate resistance from Captain William Brooks, who oversaw Collins's precinct. "Those files contain sensitive information," Brooks argued when Jackson arrived at his office. "I'll need to review them first to ensure proper protocols are followed." Jackson smiled thinly. "The Commissioner's authorization supersedes protocol. I'll wait while you gather them." After 30 minutes of obvious stalling, Brooks reluctantly produced a thin folder. "This is everything we have on Collins. As you can see, most complaints were determined to be unfounded." Jackson flipped through the sparse documentation. "According to department records, Collins has received 17 civilian complaints, not the 4 documented here. Where are the others?" Brooks shrugged. Perhaps they were misfiled or deemed too insignificant to formally process. Jackson made a note in her tablet. "I'll need access to your precinct's complete digital records, including email communications regarding complaint procedures." Brooks's face flushed. "That's beyond the scope of a single incident investigation." Jackson stood, her 5'4" frame somehow filling the room. "This isn't a single incident investigation anymore, Captain. The Commissioner has authorized a comprehensive review of departmental practices. Your cooperation isn't optional." While Jackson battled bureaucratic obstruction, Julian faced his own struggles. The medical examination had confirmed a mild concussion from his impact with the police vehicle, and persistent headaches plagued him. Worse were the psychological effects, flinching at the sound of sirens, anxiety that spiked whenever a police car appeared in his rearview mirror. He'd canceled client meetings, unable to focus on architectural plans when his mind kept replaying the moment of his arrest. His mother noticed his hands trembling as he reached for his coffee cup. "You should talk to someone, Julian. Trauma doesn't just disappear." Julian set the cup down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "I'm fine. Other people have experienced far worse." Dr. Carter Harrison fixed her son with the same penetrating gaze she used on reluctant patients. "Minimizing your experience doesn't help those people, and it certainly doesn't help you." That afternoon, attorney Zoe Washington called with news. The community center is organizing a forum on police relations tonight. They've asked if you would be willing to speak. Julian hesitated. Several colleagues had already suggested he lay low until the controversy blew over, implying that public statements might damage his father's position and, by extension, his own career prospects. "People need to hear your story, Julian," Washington pressed gently, "especially coming from someone with your background, educated professional, the Commissioner's son. It challenges the narrative that these incidents only happen to certain types of people or in certain neighborhoods." Julian thought of the other men in the holding cell the night before, how they'd looked at him with surprise when officers had suddenly become deferential upon learning his identity. How quickly the system had pivoted for him while they remained behind bars. "I'll be there," he decided. The community forum was held in the basement of First Baptist Church, a historic black congregation that had been central to civil rights activism for generations. Julian arrived to find the space overflowing, community members standing along walls and spilling out into hallways. Reverend Johnson welcomed him with a supportive hand on his shoulder. "Your courage means everything tonight." When Julian's turn came to speak, the room fell silent. He described the traffic stop in meticulous detail, his careful compliance, Officer Collins's escalating aggression, the moment of violence that seemed to happen in slow motion and hyperspeed simultaneously. "The truth," Julian concluded, "is that my father's position saved me from spending the night in jail, possibly facing trumped-up charges. But it shouldn't take being the Commissioner's son to receive fair treatment from police. That night I was just another black man until they realized who my father was, and that's the problem." The audience responded with murmurs of recognition and nodding heads. Julian hadn't noticed his father slipping into the back of the room, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. Commissioner Harrison listened as other community members stood to share similar experiences. A teacher repeatedly stopped while driving home from night classes. A doctor mistaken for a drug dealer in the hospital parking lot. A teenager handcuffed while walking through his own neighborhood. Each story hit Harrison like a physical blow, dismantling the defensive walls he'd built over decades. Meanwhile, Captain Jackson's investigation was uncovering disturbing patterns. Analysis of traffic stop data revealed that black drivers in certain precincts were 6 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers and 8 times more likely to have their vehicles searched, despite contraband being found more frequently in vehicles driven by white residents. More troubling were the complaint patterns of 143 excessive force complaints filed by minority residents in the past 5 years. Only 3 had resulted in any disciplinary action. Jackson identified a particular group of 12 officers, including Collins, who accounted for 60% of all complaints, but received no meaningful supervision or intervention. Late that night, Jackson received an anonymous email from within the department. Check the digital timestamps on complaint records against the login records. Many are being altered retroactively. The next morning, she verified this claim, discovering that dozens of complaint files had been modified after submission with details either minimized or omitted entirely. When she attempted to access the original versions from the backup server, she found those files mysteriously corrupted. Jackson was preparing to brief Commissioner Harrison when Officer Darius King requested a private meeting. King, a younger officer who had worked under Collins for 2 years, arrived visibly nervous. "What I'm about to tell you could end my career," he began, "but after seeing what happened to the commissioner's son, I can't stay silent anymore." King described a systematic process within Brooks's precinct. Certain officers, including Collins, received preferential assignments to affluent neighborhoods bordering minority communities, what they called hunting grounds, where Black and Latino drivers could be readily stopped when passing through. "It's not random," King explained. "They target specific types of vehicles, specific times of day. Brooks calls it proactive policing, but really it's just profiling. Anyone who objects gets assigned to desk duty or overnight shifts until they fall in line or transfer out." Jackson recorded King's statement promising confidentiality. "Are others willing to corroborate this?" King hesitated. "Maybe. Most are scared of retaliation. Collins has friends throughout the department." As Jackson's investigation gathered momentum, so did public pressure. National news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as both a personal drama, the commissioner's son victimized by the commissioner's department, and a symbol of broader systemic issues. Social media campaigns called for Collins's firing, Brooks's resignation, and outside oversight of the entire department. Julian's architectural firm received both messages of support and anonymous threats, the latter forwarded to Captain Jackson as evidence. Harrison found himself increasingly isolated, trusted by neither his officers nor the community he served. The mayor continued pushing for a quick resolution that would preserve the status quo while activist groups demanded sweeping reforms. At the weekly command staff meeting, Harrison could feel the silent judgment of his leadership team, their unspoken accusation, "You've betrayed us for your son." But looking at the preliminary findings from Jackson's investigation, Harrison realized the true betrayal had been his own willful blindness to what his department had become under his watch. "This stops now," he announced, sliding copies of Jackson's initial report across the table. "Not just Collins, not just this incident, all of it." Captain Jackson's preliminary report landed on Commissioner Harrison's desk with the weight of a concrete block, 43 pages of methodically documented evidence suggesting that Julian's arrest was no isolated incident, but rather the visible tip of a systemic iceberg. Harrison locked his office door before opening the file, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. The executive summary pulled no punches. Evidence indicates a coordinated pattern of discriminatory enforcement practices within the department, particularly concentrated in the central and western precincts under Captain William Brooks's command. Documentation reveals systematic alteration and suppression of civilian complaints, manipulation of crime statistics to justify increased patrols in minority neighborhoods, and an informal reward system for officers who generate high numbers of stops and arrests in targeted communities. Harrison continued reading, his professional detachment crumbling with each page. Jackson had uncovered a pattern where complaints against certain officers routinely disappeared from the system or were downgraded in severity. The report named 4 ranking officers, including Brooks and Lieutenant Sandra Miller from Internal Affairs, who appeared to be coordinating this cover-up. Most damning was an email exchange between Brooks and Miller discussing a special handling protocol for complaints against what they termed proactive officers, a list that included Collins and 11 others with similar records. Jackson had included a statistical analysis that could not be dismissed. The 12 proactive officers focused 80% of their stops and arrests on minority citizens, while similar offenses in affluent white neighborhoods were systematically ignored or addressed with warnings rather than arrests. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. A knock interrupted Harrison's reading. Mayor Wilson entered without waiting for a response, her face tight with controlled anger. "I just got off the phone with the city attorney. Do you have any idea what kind of liability you're creating with this witch hunt?" Harrison wordlessly handed her Jackson's report. Wilson glanced at it dismissively. "David, we don't need a novel-length document to address a single bad arrest. The city cannot afford class action lawsuits right now. We're already facing budget shortfalls in education and infrastructure." Harrison studied the woman he'd worked alongside for 6 years, wondering if he'd ever really known her. "This isn't about budgets, Patricia. It's about constitutional violations happening under our watch." Wilson's political smile vanished. "Don't be naive. Everything is about budgets. The private prison corporation that operates our county detention facility is one of our largest taxpayers and employers. Their contract guarantees minimum occupancy rates. Any significant reduction in arrest numbers jeopardizes thousands of jobs and millions in revenue." Harrison stared in disbelief. "Are you actually suggesting we maintain discriminatory arrest practices for economic reasons?" Wilson sighed as if explaining something to a child. "I'm suggesting you focus on Collins alone. Make him the scapegoat if you must implement some diversity training, issue body cameras, and call it reform. That satisfies the protesters while preserving the system that keeps this city financially solvent." After Wilson left, Harrison sat motionless, the mayor's words echoing. The implications were staggering. Financial incentives potentially driving enforcement priorities throughout the city. He called Jackson. "I need you to look into the city's relationship with Meridian Corrections Corporation. Find any connections between their contracts and our department's arrest quotas or performance metrics." That evening, Julian received a disturbing message on his professional website, a photo of himself entering his apartment building with a red target superimposed over his face. Similar threats had been sent to Captain Jackson and Officer King, who had now gone on record with his testimony about the hunting grounds directive. Harrison installed security cameras at his home after Julian's car was vandalized, the word "snitch" spray-painted across the hood. The threats only strengthened Julian's resolve. Working with Attorney Washington, he began systematically documenting cases similar to his own, creating a database that revealed disturbing patterns in police stops across the city. While collecting testimonies at a community center in the predominantly black Riverside neighborhood, Julian met Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old college student who had been stopped 14 times in the past year while driving between campus and his grandmother's home. "The first few times, I was terrified," Robinson told Julian. "Now it's just Tuesday. You know I budget extra time to get anywhere because I assume I'll be pulled over." Julian asked if Robinson had filed complaints. The young man laughed bitterly. "Every single time. Never heard back once. It's like shouting into a black hole." Washington helped Robinson access his complaint records through a public information request. The system showed all his complaints had been reviewed and resolved, yet Robinson had never been contacted. This pattern repeated with dozens of other residents, revealing a systematic burying of legitimate grievances. Meanwhile, Jackson's investigation faced escalating obstruction. Department servers mysteriously went offline during her scheduled access periods. Witnesses canceled interviews after receiving friendly career advice from superiors. Evidence disappeared from secure storage. Despite these obstacles, Jackson's team pieced together a damning picture. A group of senior officers, led by Brooks, had created a parallel system of law enforcement that targeted minority communities while protecting preferred officers from accountability. The scheme extended beyond mere racism into financial territory. Jackson discovered that arrest statistics were being manipulated to secure additional funding and equipment. Certain neighborhoods were classified as high crime zones based on inflated numbers, justifying aggressive patrol tactics that further increased arrest rates in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Most disturbing was the connection Jackson uncovered between Captain Brooks and Meridian Corrections Corporation. Brooks had received consulting fees for advising on security optimization payments that coincided with significant increases in arrest rates from his precinct. His wife, Jackson, discovered worked as Meridian's community relations director, a potential conflict of interest never disclosed to the department. When Jackson attempted to access Brooks's financial records through proper channels, she was blocked by bureaucratic red tape. Frustrated, she brought her findings to Harrison. "They're systematically obstructing this investigation, sir. Someone is always one step ahead, warning witnesses, blocking access, corrupting data." Harrison nodded grimly. "Because they know exactly what you're looking for and where. This goes deeper than I imagined." He made a decision that would change everything. "We need to go outside the department. I'm contacting the FBI's Civil Rights Division." The next morning, a thumb drive appeared on Jackson's desk containing email exchanges between Brooks Miller and several city officials, including the mayor's chief of staff. The anonymous note attached read simply, "Not everyone is corrupt. Some of us joined to make a difference." And the emails discussed the political necessity of maintaining arrest numbers in certain neighborhoods to satisfy contractual obligations with Meridian Corrections. One message from Miller specifically referenced the need to manage complaint statistics to avoid federal oversight. Armed with this new evidence, Harrison and Jackson met secretly with FBI Special Agent Diane Chen, who confirmed that similar patterns had triggered preliminary inquiries in several departments nationwide. This could potentially qualify as a criminal conspiracy to violate civil rights, Chen explained. But we'd need substantial evidence and cooperative witnesses to build a case. Julian's database of civilian experiences proved invaluable, providing the pattern evidence necessary for federal interest. Washington had helped him collect over 200 sworn statements describing nearly identical experiences of pretextual stops searches without consent and dismissed complaints. The stories came from teachers, nurses, students, business owners, responsible community members, whose only offense was driving while Black or Latino. As the investigation expanded, so did the threats. Harrison received an anonymous message containing personal information about his family members' daily routines, a clear intimidation tactic. Julian found his client list had suddenly dried up, with several major projects unexpectedly canceled. Jackson discovered her home had been broken into, though nothing was visibly stolen, but her private case notes were noticeably disturbed. Most concerning was the sudden drug arrest of Officer King, caught with cocaine in his locker during a random inspection. The evidence was suspicious in its convenience, but King was immediately suspended and discredited as a witness. Harrison realized they were now in a race against time. Someone within the department was actively working to undermine the investigation and silence potential witnesses. With Jackson's assistance, he began secretly recording conversations with the mayor and other officials documenting the pressure to limit the investigation's scope. During one particularly revealing meeting, Mayor Wilson explicitly mentioned that Meridian's contract renewal depends on maintaining current incarceration levels. When Harrison pointed out the ethical issues, Wilson retorted, "Ethics don't fund the city budget, David. Practical decisions do." The conspiracy was broader and more entrenched than anyone had initially suspected. It wasn't just about racist officers or corrupted complaint processes, but about a system designed to feed bodies into a profitable incarceration machine, with minority communities bearing the disproportionate burden. As Harrison, Jackson, Julian, and Washington compiled their evidence for the FBI, they knew they were challenging not just a few bad actors, but powerful economic and political interests that would fight ferociously to maintain the status quo. The question was no longer whether corruption existed, but how deep it went, and how many were complicit willingly or through silent acquiescence. The answer, Harrison feared, might implicate him most of all. The vote of no confidence came without warning. Commissioner Harrison arrived at headquarters on Monday morning to find the results of the weekend's emergency union meeting posted in the lobby. 87% of officers had expressed serious concerns about leadership direction and priorities. The carefully worded statement avoided direct criticism, but made the message clear. The rank and file believed Harrison had betrayed them by prioritizing his son's case over departmental solidarity. Harrison had anticipated resistance, but the overwhelming numbers stunned him. As he crossed the lobby, officers who had once greeted him warmly now studied computer screens with sudden fascination or found urgent reasons to walk in opposite directions. In his office, the morning briefing was uncharacteristically tense updates delivered in clipped tones with minimal elaboration. When Harrison dismissed the command staff, only Deputy Commissioner Reed remained behind. "They're scared, Davidson," Reed said once the door closed. "Not just about Collins or Brooks, but about what happens if everything gets exposed. Good officers who looked the other way, who suspected problems but stayed silent, they fear being painted with the same brush." Harrison rubbed his temples where a persistent headache had taken up residence. "And what about you, Tom? Where do you stand?" Reed's expression revealed genuine conflict. 30 years on the job, I've seen improvements. Things aren't perfect, but they're better than when we started. This scorched earth approach might destroy whatever progress we've made." Harrison leaned forward. "Progress for whom, Tom?" "Because from where Julian stands, not much has changed at all." Across town, the personal costs were mounting for Julian as well. Death threats had become frequent enough that he'd temporarily moved back to his parents' home where security could be better managed. His architectural first term had placed him on special project status, effectively a paid leave of absence after several clients expressed concerns about being associated with a controversial figure. Most painful was the brick thrown through the front window of his parents' home, wrapped in a note reading, "Race traitors deserve what they get." Dr. Carter Harrison had initially refused to leave, but after a second incident where their garage was vandalized, she reluctantly agreed to stay with her sister in a neighboring county. The toll showed in Julian's face, dark circles under his eyes, weight loss, evident in the hollows of his cheeks. Still, he continued working with Washington to document cases and build their database of evidence. During a meeting at Washington's office, Julian's phone buzzed with a news alert. The mayor had announced a special commission to review police procedures stacked with political allies and without any real oversight power. "Classic deflection tactic," Washington observed. "Create a powerless committee, let them deliberate for months, issue non-binding recommendations that never get implemented." Julian tossed his phone aside in frustration. Meanwhile, nothing changes. Washington studied him carefully. "How are you holding up, really?" Julian attempted a dismissive shrug that failed to convince. "I'm fine." Washington's expression remained skeptical. "No shame in admitting this is hard. You didn't ask to become the face of this fight." Julian stared out the window at protesters gathered in the park across from City Hall. "None of them asked for it either, but here we are." His phone rang an unknown number. Julian hesitated before answering. Too many calls lately had contained only breathing or slurs before disconnecting. This caller, however, identified himself as a journalist from the Washington Post, seeking comment on information they had received about Mayor Wilson's financial connections to Meridian Corrections. "We have documents showing the mayor received significant campaign contributions from Meridian executives and related PACs. There's also evidence she owns stock in their parent company. Would you or Commissioner Harrison care to comment?" Julian arranged for the journalist to meet with Washington, who had been compiling similar financial connections. The Post article published 2 days later sent shockwaves through the city government. It detailed how Meridian Corrections had effectively captured multiple levels of local governance through strategic donations, consulting contracts, and promises of economic development. The mayor's office issued an immediate denial, calling the allegations politically motivated attacks without merit. But the damage was done. Public attention had shifted from a single arrest to the broader system that incentivized over-policing of certain communities. Captain Jackson's home was broken into that night, investigation files stolen from her home office. Fortunately, she had created encrypted backups stored off-site, but the message was clear: powerful interests were getting desperate. The next morning, Harrison received a call from Congressman James Marshall, a chair of the House Judiciary Committee and a nationally recognized civil rights leader. "Commissioner, I've been following events in your city with great concern. My committee is considering hearings on privatized corrections and their influence on local policing. Would you be willing to testify?" The invitation represented both opportunity and risk. National attention could accelerate reforms, but would also intensify backlash. Before Harrison could decide, the mayor summoned him to an urgent private meeting. When he arrived at her office, Harrison found not just the mayor, but also city manager Robert Phillips, city attorney Grace Chen, and two men he didn't recognize. Mayor Wilson performed minimal introductions. The strangers were identified only as advisors from Meridian Corrections before getting directly to the point. "David, this situation has become untenable. The department is in chaos. The city faces potential lawsuits, and investor confidence in municipal bonds is wavering. We need resolution immediately." Harrison remained standing, declining the offered seat. "I agree completely. The corruption within my department and its connections to private prison contracts do need immediate resolution." Wilson's plastic smile tightened. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. This witch hunt serves no one's interests. It needs to end." Phillips, the city manager, slid a folder across the table. "We've prepared a statement announcing your early retirement effective immediately. You'll receive full pension benefits, plus a consulting contract with the city worth $300,000 annually for 5 years. Harrison didn't touch the folder. "And in exchange," Chen, the city attorney, answered smoothly, "you would agree to end the current internal investigation, make no public statements regarding departmental matters, and decline any invitations to testify before governmental bodies." Harrison translated, "You want me to bury evidence of civil rights violations, silence myself permanently, and refuse to cooperate with federal authorities." One of the Meridian representatives spoke for the first time. "Commissioner, we prefer to frame it as prioritizing the city's economic stability and your own family's security." The implicit threat wasn't subtle. Harrison thought of Julian, of Dr. Carter Harrison, of the officers like King, who had risked everything to come forward. "If I refuse," Mayor Wilson sighed dramatically, "then unfortunately evidence has come to light suggesting financial improprieties in your management of department resources. The city would have no choice but to pursue criminal charges." Harrison felt a strange calm descend. "You're threatening to frame me if I don't participate in your cover-up." No one contradicted him. Harrison walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I expected better even from politicians." Instead of backing down, Harrison and Julian called a joint press conference the following morning. Standing together on the steps of police headquarters, father and son presented a united front that visibly disconcerted their opponents. Harrison spoke first, outlining in careful terms the preliminary findings of Jackson's investigation and announcing that he had formally requested FBI involvement. Julian followed with personal testimony and statistics from their community database, putting human faces to the patterns of discrimination. The press conference was still being broadcast live when Harrison received notification that he had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of budgetary irregularities. The mayor's threatened retaliation implemented with stunning speed. Have you ever witnessed someone risk everything to stand up for what's right? Type #1 in the comments if you believe that systems only change when brave individuals refuse to accept the status quo. Like this video if you think both Julian and Commissioner Harrison are showing true courage in the face of overwhelming opposition. Now I have a question for you. What would you sacrifice to ensure justice for your community? How far would you go to expose corruption, even if it meant losing your job, your reputation, or your safety? Let's continue our story and see how Julian and Harrison navigate these dangerous waters as the forces against them grow increasingly desperate. Within hours of Harrison's suspension, Captain Brooks was named acting commissioner, a move that sent an unmistakable message throughout the department. His first official act, reassigning Captain Jackson to the Property Crimes Division, effectively removing her from the internal investigation, was executed with bureaucratic efficiency. Standard procedure during leadership transitions, Brooks explained to the hastily assembled command staff. All ongoing internal investigations will be reviewed for proper protocol and resource allocation. Deputy Commissioner Reed, who many had expected would assume temporary leadership, sat stone-faced at the conference table. After the meeting, he confronted Brooks privately. "This is a mistake, Bill. It looks exactly like what it is, retaliation and cover-up." Brooks arranged his features into an expression of wounded professionalism. "I'm simply restoring order to a department that's been thrown into chaos by personal vendettas. If Jackson's investigation had merit, it will be continued under appropriate supervision." Reed's response was quiet but firm. "I've served this department for 30 years. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is anything but damage control." Meanwhile, Julian and Washington scrambled to protect their database of witness testimonies and evidence. "They'll come after this next," Washington warned as they transferred files to secure servers and created multiple backups. "Everyone who's spoken to us is at risk." Julian had already begun receiving messages from witnesses reporting intimidation, unexpected traffic stop citations for minor code violations, even visits from officers inquiring about unrelated matters. Most disturbing was the arrest of Officer King, who had been taken into custody after drugs were allegedly found in his locker during a random inspection. "This is a setup," King maintained when Washington visited him in holding. "I've never touched drugs. They're silencing me because I was ready to testify about the hunting grounds directives." Washington worked through the night preparing emergency motions, but before she could file them, King was transferred to the county detention facility on administrative grounds, placing him beyond her immediate reach. Harrison, stripped of his badge and authority, converted his home study into an operations center. Though officially barred from department resources, his decades of service had created a network of loyal contacts who continued providing information. Through these back channels, Harrison learned that Brooks had ordered an audit of all digital communications related to Jackson's investigation, clearly searching for everyone who had cooperated. They're identifying witnesses and whistleblowers. Harrison told Julian during their secure communications they had resorted to burner phones after discovering their regular devices had been compromised. "Anyone who spoke to Jackson is being isolated or discredited." Julian nodded grimly. "Washington's getting similar reports. They're using administrative procedures as weapons reassignments, schedule changes, performance reviews. Nothing overtly retaliatory, but the message is clear." Despite the pressure, Julian continued gathering evidence. Using his architectural background, he created detailed maps correlating traffic stop locations with demographic data, revealing unmistakable patterns of targeted enforcement. When he overlaid property values and development plans, another pattern emerged: aggressive policing often preceded gentrification efforts, effectively clearing areas for commercial development. Following this thread, Julian discovered that Meridian Corrections' parent company, Capital Venture Partners, also owned significant real estate holdings throughout the city, particularly in areas experiencing heavy police activity. Further investigation revealed that Brooks owned rental properties in neighborhoods where enforcement had suddenly decreased, allowing property values to rise unimpeded by crime statistics. The financial connections were becoming clearer. The same corporate interests benefiting from high incarceration rates were also profiting from the resulting property value manipulations. As Julian compiled these findings, his apartment was broken into. Though nothing valuable was visibly stolen, his computer had been accessed. Fortunately, he had kept critical evidence on encrypted drives stored elsewhere, but the violation left him shaken. The timing wasn't coincidental that morning. National civil rights leader Dr. Elijah Freeman had arrived in the city, bringing media attention and promises of Department of Justice involvement. What's happening here reflects patterns we're seeing nationwide, Dr. Freeman announced at a rally that drew thousands. The commodification of justice, where public safety has been corrupted into a profit center built on the backs of marginalized communities. Freeman's presence elevated the situation from local controversy to national conversation. Cable news networks established permanent live positions outside police headquarters, and social media campaigns spread awareness of the case far beyond city limits. The increased scrutiny should have provided some protection, but instead, the opposition grew more desperate. Captain Jackson's daughter was pulled over 3 times in a single day by different officers citing minor infractions. Washington's law office received so many bomb threats that she was forced to relocate operations temporarily. Harrison discovered that his personal and financial records had been subpoenaed as part of the budgetary irregularities investigation, a fishing expedition designed to find or fabricate evidence against him. Most alarming was the arrest of Officer Zoe Rivera, a rookie who had provided Jackson with recordings of precinct meetings where Brooks explicitly directed officers to focus enforcement in specific neighborhoods. Rivera was charged with drug possession after a confidential informant claimed to have purchased cocaine from her. The evidence was flimsy, but the damage to her credibility was immediate. With official channels compromised and allies under attack, Harrison turned to unconventional methods. Through Reed, who was increasingly disturbed by Brooks's actions, Harrison connected with a network of officers who shared his concerns about departmental corruption. These officers began documenting orders and activities that violated policy or law, creating a parallel record beyond Brooks's reach. Julian in Washington established contact with journalists from ProPublica and the New York Times, providing them with enough evidence to launch their own investigations while protecting source identities. Most significantly, Washington arranged a confidential meeting between Harrison and FBI Special Agent Marcus Bell, who revealed that the Bureau had been investigating Meridian Corrections for similar patterns in multiple jurisdictions. "What you're experiencing is their standard playbook," Bell explained. "When scrutiny increases, they activate political allies to suppress evidence and discredit witnesses. We've seen identical tactics in 3 other cities." Bell couldn't officially confirm an active investigation, but provided secure communication channels and advised on evidence preservation. "Document everything, create redundant backups, trust no one you haven't personally vetted." Armed with this guidance, Harrison executed a carefully planned countermove. Using Reed as an intermediary, he arranged for trusted officers to transfer complete copies of department records, including complaint histories, officer disciplinary files, and patrol assignments, all before Brooks could alter or destroy them. These records provided undeniable evidence of the systemic targeting of minority communities and the protection of officers with excessive complaint histories. Julian, meanwhile, had made a breakthrough of his own. Analyzing financial disclosures, he discovered that Mayor Wilson had received speaking fees from Capital Venture Partners affiliates totaling over $200,000 in the past year alone, payments not disclosed in her official ethics filings. More damning were emails obtained through public records requests showing the mayor's office coordinating with Meridian executives to adjust police department performance metrics in ways that would maintain high arrest numbers in contract-specified neighborhoods. The evidence painted a clear picture of public safety policy being shaped by private profit motives rather than community needs. With their case building, Harrison and Julian prepared to take their evidence public. The night before their planned announcement, however, Julian narrowly escaped death when his car's brake lines were cut, causing him to crash on a steep hill. Only his quick thinking in using the emergency brake prevented a fatal accident. The attack crossed a line from intimidation to attempted murder, forcing Julian into temporary hiding while elevating the stakes for everyone involved. Brooks, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, made his most aggressive move yet. Using emergency powers granted during Harrison's suspension, he ordered a massive sweep of the Riverside neighborhood, the epicenter of protests against police practices, resulting in over 100 arrests for minor infractions. Among those detained were 3 journalists, 5 clergy members, and a city council member who had been vocal in supporting reform. The excessive response backfired spectacularly, playing out on live television as riot-equipped officers confronted peaceful protesters, including elderly residents and families with children. The images shocked viewers nationwide, generating widespread condemnation and calls for federal intervention. Even officers within the department were disturbed by the heavy-handed tactics, with several quietly removing themselves from the operation. The botched raid created an unexpected opportunity. With Brooks focused on managing the public relations disaster, Harrison, Julian, Washington, and Jackson convened an emergency meeting with FBI agents and federal prosecutors. For hours, they presented their evidence, financial records, showing the profit motivations behind enforcement patterns, statistical proof of discriminatory policing testimony from officers about explicit targeting directives, documentation of complaint suppression, and clear connections between political decisions and private corporate interests. "This isn't about a single wrongful arrest anymore," Harrison concluded. "It's about a system deliberately designed to profit from selective enforcement and mass incarceration with racial minorities bearing the disproportionate burden." As the prosecutors reviewed the evidence Julian received, word that Brooks had just ordered a raid on Washington's office seeking to seize their witness database. But the order came too late. All the evidence was already in federal hands beyond the reach of local interference. The first federal subpoenas were issued the following morning. The pre-dawn raid took everyone by surprise. FBI agents simultaneously descended on police headquarters, Brooks's home, Mayor Wilson's office, and the regional headquarters of Meridian Corrections, armed with detailed warrants based on the evidence provided by Harrison, Julian, and their allies. Federal authorities seized computers, financial records, and communication devices before their targets could destroy incriminating materials. Acting Commissioner Brooks was caught literally shredding documents when agents entered his office at 5:30 in the morning. The mayor, alerted to the raids by her security detail, held an emergency press conference denouncing the politically motivated witch hunt and federal overreach. But her practiced composure cracked when reporters asked specifically about the $200,000 in undisclosed consulting fees she had received from Meridian subsidiaries. "Those payments were for legitimate professional services unrelated to my official duties," she insisted, though she struggled to explain exactly what services justified such substantial compensation. As federal agents combed through evidence, Brooks made a fatal miscalculation. Believing the raid was a limited action focused on financial crimes, he ordered a massive crackdown on ongoing protests, deploying riot units with instructions to clear the streets by any means necessary. What followed was captured by dozens of news cameras and hundreds of smartphone videos, officers in tactical gear using excessive force against peaceful demonstrators, including elderly community leaders, clergy in clerical collars, and journalists with clearly visible press credentials. The violence escalated when officers fired tear gas into a crowd that included children and disabled individuals, creating panic and causing numerous injuries. National Guard units called in by the governor after pressure from Brooks about imminent riots refused the police department's requests to assist in the crackdown, their commander stating firmly that his troops would not be used against American citizens exercising their constitutional rights. Images of bloodied protesters being dragged into police vans flooded social media and news broadcasts, generating immediate national outrage. Civil rights organizations filed emergency injunctions. Congressional leaders demanded federal intervention. When Reverend Johnson, a 70-year-old community leader and veteran of the original civil rights movement, was hospitalized after being struck by an officer's baton, public sentiment reached a breaking point. Within hours, the Department of Justice announced it was expanding its investigation to include civil rights violations and use of excessive force. Attorney General Elizabeth Montgomery issued a statement. The scenes unfolding in Westlake are inconsistent with constitutional policing and the basic principles of American democracy. The Department of Justice will use every available tool to restore justice and accountability. In a dramatic development that afternoon, Deputy Commissioner Reed, who had watched the violent crackdown with increasing horror, called an unprecedented press conference. Flanked by 27 supervising officers representing nearly half of the department's command staff, Reed publicly broke ranks with Brooks. What happened today does not represent who we are as police officers or what we swore to uphold. Reed declared, his voice shaking with emotion. I am directing all officers under my command to stand down from protest response duties, effective immediately. We will protect public safety, but we will not be instruments of oppression. The public split in department leadership created chaos in the chain of command. Some officers followed Reed's directive, while others remained loyal to Brooks, resulting in confused and inconsistent responses throughout the city. In this moment of institutional crisis, Brooks made his final desperate move. Using emergency powers, he ordered the arrest of Reed and the officers who had stood with him, charging them with inciting insurrection within the department, an archaic statute from the 1920s never before invoked. When officers arrived at Reed's location to execute the arrest, they found themselves facing a human shield of community members who had spontaneously gathered to protect him. Rather than escalate further, the officers withdrew, effectively nullifying Brooks's order and signaling the collapse of his authority. Recognizing that the situation had spiraled beyond political management, Governor Eleanor Martinez invoked emergency powers to supersede city officials. In a televised address, she announced the temporary suspension of Westlake's police command structure, placing the state police superintendent in charge of public safety operations until federal investigations were complete. Mayor Wilson Brooks and their allies suddenly found themselves stripped of operational control, their ability to interfere with evidence or intimidate witnesses effectively neutralized. With this protection in place, witnesses began coming forward in unprecedented numbers. Officer Rivera, released from custody after the drug charges against her were revealed as fabrication, provided crucial testimony about explicit directives to target minority drivers. Desk sergeants confessed to systematic suppression of civilian complaints under orders from superior officers. Financial analysts from the city budget office detailed how arrest quotas were directly tied to Meridian's contract requirements. Most damaging was testimony from a former Meridian executive who had been quietly cooperating with the FBI, providing internal documents showing the company's strategy of capturing local criminal justice systems through campaign contributions, lucrative consulting contracts for officials, and economic pressure on municipal governments. Meanwhile, Julian organized the largest demonstration in city history, a peaceful march that stretched over 20 city blocks, bringing together community members from all backgrounds in a powerful display of unity. Most striking were the dozens of police officers who joined the march in civilian clothes, carrying signs reading "Reform from Within" and "Justice is not negotiable." The sight of officers marching alongside citizens they had been deployed against just days earlier became a powerful symbol of the potential for systemic change. As the march reached City Hall, Julian took the stage to address the crowd. He no longer spoke as just a victim of police misconduct, but as a bridge between communities that had viewed each other with suspicion for generations. What happened to me was wrong, he told the assembled thousands, but focusing solely on my case misses the larger injustice. Thousands of our neighbors have experienced similar treatment without the protection of a father in leadership or the privilege of resources to fight back. Their stories matter just as much as mine. This movement isn't about a single incident. It's about dismantling a system that has commodified justice and profited from inequity. While Julian rallied public support, Harrison testified before a federal grand jury, both providing a comprehensive account of how the department he had led had evolved into an instrument of discriminatory enforcement and private profit. With remarkable candor, he acknowledged his own failure to recognize or address the corruption that had flourished under his command. "I believed we were making progress because the statistics I chose to monitor showed improvement," Harrison admitted. "I didn't look deeper because doing so would have required confronting uncomfortable truths about the department and ultimately about my own leadership." The grand jury proceedings remained sealed, but sources close to the investigation confirmed that indictments were imminent, targeting not just Brooks and corrupt officers, but also city officials and corporate executives involved in the scheme. Mayor Wilson, sensing the shifting winds, held a hastily organized press conference announcing her resignation to focus on family matters, a transparent attempt to distance herself from the impending charges. Brooks made a more desperate move, attempting to flee the jurisdiction with nearly $300,000 in cash hidden in his vehicle. State troopers apprehended him at the airport, adding flight risk to the mounting charges against him, as federal prosecutors prepared their cases. Harrison faced his own reckoning. Though cleared of the fabricated financial misconduct allegations, he couldn't escape responsibility for the systemic problems that had developed during his tenure. In a private conversation with Julian, he confronted this painful reality. "I failed, son. Not just you, but everyone who counted on me to ensure equal justice. I saw what I wanted to see and ignored what was inconvenient." Julian considered his father thoughtfully. "You did fail," he agreed, offering no easy absolution. "But you also found the courage to face that failure and work to correct it. That matters too." The City Council, operating under intense public scrutiny, established an independent police oversight commission with genuine investigative and disciplinary powers, something activists had demanded for decades without success. In a move that surprised many, they offered Harrison a position on this commission, not as a defender of the status quo, but as someone uniquely positioned to understand how systems resist meaningful change. As Harrison contemplated this offer, the first federal indictments were unsealed, naming 37 individuals in a conspiracy that had corrupted the city's justice system for personal and corporate profit. The charges ranged from civil rights violations and witness tampering to racketeering and fraud, signaling the beginning of a comprehensive accounting that would ultimately reach far beyond a single department or city. The system that had protected itself for so long was finally breaking open, exposing decades of injustice to the disinfecting light of public scrutiny. 6 months passed like a whirlwind of change each day, bringing new developments in what local media had dubbed the Westlake Reckoning. Summer heat gave way to autumn crispness as the city underwent a transformation more profound than mere seasonal change. Julian stood at the window of his new office, watching construction crews break ground on the Community Justice Center being built where a Meridian detention facility once stood. The symmetry wasn't accidental. The land had been seized through asset forfeiture after Meridian executives were convicted of racketeering and civil rights violations. The Justice Center would house legal aid services, community mediation programs, and social support resources designed by Julian's firm, with input from the communities it would serve. His phone buzzed with a notification the sentencing for former Acting Commissioner Brooks had just been announced. 20 years in federal prison for multiple counts of conspiracy evidence, tampering, and civil rights violations. Officer Collins had received 8 years for his role in the discriminatory enforcement scheme and the specific violations of Julian's rights. Other officers involved received sentences ranging from probation to 15 years depending on their level of participation and cooperation with prosecutors. The mayor and 3 city council members had pleaded guilty to corruption charges, receiving substantial fines and prison terms. Most significantly, 5 executives from Meridian Corrections faced decades in prison for orchestrating the entire scheme, using private prison contracts to essentially purchase discriminatory enforcement that filled their facilities and drove their profits. The criminal proceedings had exposed the full scope of the conspiracy, a deliberate strategy to incentivize arrests in targeted communities, suppress complaints, manipulate crime statistics, and use political pressure to maintain the profitable status quo. But beyond the criminal cases, more fundamental changes were reshaping the city. Harrison had declined reinstatement as commissioner, instead accepting leadership of the newly established Civilian Oversight Commission. With genuine independence and substantial authority, the Commission reviewed police policies, investigated misconduct allegations, and implemented sweeping reforms. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage accessible through public records requests. Complaint procedures were completely overhauled with independent review of all allegations. Most significantly, patrol assignments and performance evaluations were restructured to emphasize community engagement rather than arrest numbers. Captain Jackson, now Interim Police Commissioner Jackson, had undertaken the daunting task of rebuilding the department's culture from the ground up. New training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural competency. Hiring practices prioritized recruiting officers from within the communities they would serve. Regular community feedback sessions allowed residents to directly address concerns with commanding officers. Behind these visible changes were the less obvious but equally important shifts in data collection and analysis. Julian had worked with data scientists to develop transparency dashboards that tracked enforcement patterns by neighborhood officer and infraction type, making disparities immediately visible rather than hidden within aggregated statistics. The early results were promising. Citizen complaints had decreased by 40%, while community satisfaction with police interactions showed marked improvement. Violent crime rates remained stable, despite a significant reduction in arrests for minor offenses, challenging the long-held assumption that aggressive enforcement was necessary for public safety. Julian's professional life had transformed as well. Using the settlement from his own case, he established the Equity in Justice Foundation, providing legal representation for victims of systemic discrimination and advocating for policy reforms. The foundation had already helped secure the release of 23 individuals wrongfully convicted through the corrupted system, with dozens more cases under review. His architectural practice now specialized in designing spaces that fostered community healing and restorative justice, with projects underway in several cities facing similar reckonings. Most rewarding was the university course Julian co-taught with his father, Structural Reform Redesigning Systems of Justice. The class brought together students from law enforcement backgrounds, community activism, urban planning, and legal studies to examine how systems either perpetuate or dismantle inequality. The father-son teaching partnership had become a powerful symbol of the potential for transformation, their once strained relationship now strengthened through shared purpose. One Tuesday afternoon, driving to a community planning session, Julian noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. The familiar surge of anxiety rose in his chest. Trauma responses didn't disappear overnight, despite all the progress. He pulled over carefully, hands visible on the steering wheel, as Officer Maya Rodriguez approached his vehicle. "Good afternoon, sir. I stopped you because your right tail light is out. May I see your license and registration, please?" Julian provided the documents, noting the officer's professional demeanor and activated body camera. "I wasn't aware of the tail light. Thank you for letting me know." Officer Rodriguez examined his information and returned it promptly. "I recommend getting that fixed as soon as possible, Mr. Carter. Have a safe day." No unnecessary questions, no assumptions about why he was in the neighborhood, no escalation from a minor equipment violation to a traumatic encounter. It was a small interaction utterly unremarkable in what it should have been all along, and in that unremarkable quality lay the evidence of real change. As Julian drove away, he passed the construction site where his Justice Center was taking shape. The architectural plans had evolved through dozens of community feedback sessions, incorporating elements that reflected the diverse neighborhoods it would serve. The central atrium would feature a mural telling the story of the city's journey, not glossing over the painful history, but illustrating how communities had united to demand transformation. Julian had insisted that the building include spaces for both celebration and reflection, recognizing that justice required both accountability for past harms and vision for a more equitable future. The final element in this story of transformation was perhaps the most important: Julian's mentorship program for young Black students interested in architecture and civic engagement. Every Saturday morning, he worked with 20 high school students, teaching them not just design principles, but how physical spaces could either reinforce or challenge existing power structures. Architecture isn't neutral, he often told them. Every building, every street layout, every public space makes a statement about who belongs and who doesn't. Our job is to design inclusion and equity into the very foundations. Today's students would become tomorrow's city planners, architects, police officers, judges, and community leaders. By investing in their development, Julian ensured that the changes so painfully won would extend beyond a single moment of crisis into sustained transformation. In a quiet moment between classes, Harrison had once asked Julian if he regretted the night of his arrest, given all the trauma and disruption that followed. Julian had considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret that it happened, but I don't regret what it revealed." Some systems won't change until they're forced to confront their fundamental flaws. My single experience opened the door to addressing thousands of others that might have remained buried. How could I regret that? As Julian parked outside the community center where residents were gathering to review the latest Justice Center designs, he reflected on how a single moment of injustice had catalyzed a movement for change that continued to grow beyond anything he could have imagined on that fateful night. The work wasn't finished, true transformation never was, but the foundations had been laid for a system that might finally deliver on its promise of equal justice for all. What do you think about Julian and Harrison's journey from personal trauma to systemic change? Has this story made you think differently about how systems either resist or embrace transformation? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on what aspect of this reform process you found most important. If you believe that every community deserves a justice system that truly protects and serves all its members. Equally, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of courage and change. And if you know someone who's working for justice in their own community, share this video with them as a reminder that even the most entrenched systems can be transformed when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one city's reckoning with its past and reimagining of its future. Until next time, remember that the most powerful force for change is ordinary people who decide that justice cannot wait another day. Julian Carter's story teaches us that systemic change requires both personal courage and institutional accountability. What began as a single wrongful arrest revealed an entire ecosystem of corruption where racial profiling served financial interests while devastating communities. The most profound lesson is that justice isn't automatic. It demands vigilance and action from those with power and those without. True transformation happens when we recognize that the system isn't some abstract entity, but a collection of individual choices made daily. Harrison learned that good intentions without oversight enable corruption, while Julian discovered that privilege confers responsibility to speak for those whose voices are systematically silenced. Their journey demonstrates that meaningful reform requires confronting uncomfortable truths, dismantling financial incentives that perpetuate discrimination, and creating transparent accountability mechanisms that respond to community needs. It shows us that change is possible even within deeply entrenched systems when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that a just society isn't measured by how it treats the privileged, but by how it protects the vulnerable. When we design systems that truly serve everyone equally, we all become safer, freer, and more whole. The path forward requires both institutional reform and personal transformation. Neither alone is sufficient, but together they can rebuild broken systems into instruments of genuine justice. What systems in your own community might need similar examination and reform? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where privilege either protected someone or exposed injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more narratives that explore how courage and persistence can transform broken systems. Share this video with someone who's working for justice in their own community. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in the struggle makes all the difference. Thank you for joining me on Julian's journey from victim to catalyst for change. Remember, the arc of history may bend toward justice, but it's our hands that must do the bending.